The YMCA, the black YMCA, bought the black pool. And they caught all kind of hell from the black community because we were cooperating with the plan of the white establishment. We were aiding and abetting their attempt to maintain de facto segregation. And it was my first experience about how complicated politics can be.
As an 8-year-old.
As an 8-year-old. And the black community essentially began to boycott its own YMCA, or the black YMCA.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Phillip Nelson.
Hi, I'm Phil Nelson. I want to welcome you to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a series of conversations that were held between Dr. Peter Weinstein and myself shortly after the death of George Floyd. And today's episode is entitled De Facto Segregation. I hope you enjoy and share.
I hope there comes a day where we don't have to have these courageous conversations, that they are a comfortable part of everyday life in this country.
Yeah, but see, that's
a far-fetched hope as well.
Those are two opposite wishes.
Yep.
This is the next evolution of society, the ability to discuss these type of issues.
And not only these issues, but other issues that are not race-based.
Right. The only reason the United States, until Trump became president, was a country that believed in the rule of law. And because the country has been safe from war, from extensive famine, even though we have food deserts, etc., because our borders have not been breached, we've developed it to a point where we can actually deal with these issues without turning over the government, without nationwide violence, as opposed to less developed countries who still have to deal with food sources and security issues, etc. Now, one of the reasons we are in such a dire state right now is because we have more people with food insecurity than we've had in a long time. We have more people with housing insecurity than we've had in a long time. We have more people who are not secure about their future or health care than we had in a long time. And unfortunately, all of those things tend to affect people of color more than white society. And because of the demographic changes, because we're becoming a plurality, it's becoming more and more evident that that's occurring. And, you know, when I was in graduate school, there were more white people on welfare because there were more white people in America. Still, the myth was everybody on welfare was black. But Kentucky has the highest percentage of people on welfare than any other state. And Kentucky is 90% white. So there was a difference between the propaganda and the fact. Now, however, the country is about 65% white nationally. And so the minority population is a lot larger now. And if 80% of them are insecure about where they're going to get their meals tomorrow, then you got national insecurity. And you're not going to control it with law and order.
I think if we look back to the 70s, and I grew up in New York in the 70s, and the issues in the streets of New York, the crime in the streets, the prostitution, the drugs, the gangs and other things, it was reflective of many of the challenges that you just addressed, which were financially based challenges.
Yeah.
And we still haven't found solutions, uniform solutions, to help all people get past food insecurity and comfort in their own lives. And I think we've got bigger picture issues from that standpoint. Phil, I am sorry that we didn't have this conversation before George Floyd. This is a conversation that if we were having before George Floyd and maybe had expanded, that these issues might have been mollified to some degree. But these are the conversations that really should have been going on since Rodney King, since Martin Luther King, and they just haven't happened.
Well, I agree. I'm not so sure that an apology is necessary. I will accept your apology, but I am sorry that we didn't have these conversations before slavery. I am sorry we didn't have these conversations before lynching. Again, I think it is more a function of the development of our society. And as I've said before, this discussion is still about how do we treat our slaves.
Yeah.
And until we get rid of that mentality, I disagree with you a little in that we haven't found the solutions. I think the solutions are there. Institutional racism in terms of housing began with redlining in cities. And by redlining, we created low security prisons within cities and called them neighborhoods. And now we have political resistance to change it. So much so that we're being fed propaganda that my people want to destroy the suburbs, when in essence, they want to live in one.
Right. So I've got a question for you. You know, you said we called them neighborhoods, but where did the term projects come from?
I can't answer that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, like, what are they trying to do? Build something? I mean, is it a model? I mean, it's an interesting terminology. Obviously, I'm sure you've heard it.
Yes, and if I were to guess, I would think that the word project was a derivative of the fact many of these tenements were government funded. It was a very efficient way of housing people in one area, usually in an area of the city that nobody else would have built a house in.
Yeah, it's just interesting because most of it is governmental housing, and I'm looking it up as we're talking to try to figure out if there's a way where the terminology came from. But it didn't start here because it actually started in other countries as well. You know where it came from?
Where?
Public housing projects.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So, yeah, it's not public housing, it's a project.
That's because they're private individuals living in this housing. The word public simply represented the funding.
Yep.
You know, I grew up in Mississippi when the Sovereignty Commission was there. And I ran into a lot of good people, good white people that knew certain things were wrong, but the institutional structure prevented them or discouraged them or threatened them from expressing their opinion about being wrong. So much so that there was a spy network that allowed financial retribution. You might not get a loan if you were from the bank, if you were considered too liberal. Because Ross Barnett had a network of information through the Sovereignty Commission, which was funded by the state. And this commission knew when They knew every person that participated in their desire was to know anybody who helped fund a protest movement or who did something counter to the segregationist laws or Jim Crow laws. And if they found people moving toward integration or being overly complicit with the minority, then they began to put pressure on them. When the Civil Rights Bill was passed, our swimming pools were segregated in Jackson, Mississippi. And in order to keep me from swimming with their white children, when the Civil Rights Bill was passed and it became clear that they could not have segregated pools, Jackson chose to close all their pools rather than integrate them. And then they developed a plan to build new pools, smaller pools, neighborhood pools, hoping that we would stay in our neighborhood and go to the pool in our neighborhood. And therefore we wouldn't mix and mingle. And because of redlining, as well as strategically inflating the cost of homes in certain areas, we had segregated housing too. And so it was very likely that, you went to a pool. Well, anyway, the big pools suddenly went for they were up for sale. And the segregated white pools were snapped up immediately by private organizations. The Masons, what's the other group? Rotary.
Elks.
They bought the pools at a discount, by the way.
Daughters of the Confederacy.
Yeah. YMCA even bought a pool, okay? There was only one Black public pool in the entire city. And it was on Jackson State's campus. And I hadn't learned to swim. I was like 8, 9 years old. And I was just about to learn to swim when they closed the pools. Actually, no, I hadn't learned to swim yet. And the YMCA, the Black YMCA, bought the Black pool. And they caught all kind of hell from the Black community because we were cooperating with the plan of the white establishment. We were aiding and abetting their attempt to maintain de facto segregation. And it was my first experience about how complicated politics can be.
As an 8-year-old.
And the Black community essentially began to boycott its own YMCA, or the Black YMCA. I was a Boy Scout at the YMCA. And one Saturday we were supposed to go down to the pool and clean it up so that we could open it. And by the time the sale had gone through, it had been closed for maybe a year and a half, and people had thrown trash in it and stuff. So we were gonna go down there and get the glass out and clean it up. And I went to the pool by myself. I was by myself. Nobody else showed up. And that's when I realized how fervent the Black community was about this decision. And I was wondering why my dad took me down there, because I know my dad knew about it, but he didn't try to stop me. He knew how bad I wanted to learn to swim. And he went on to work, and he worked on it on Jackson State. He was director of food service at Jackson State. And I sat there for an hour. And I could have easily just walked over to his office, but I sat there for an hour and I just got angry. And we used to have this chalk rock that you could find along sidewalks that you could write, right. And so I made a makeshift banner out of some wood that was there. And I wrote, "I just want to learn to swim." And I just started walking up and down the sidewalk in front of the pool as cars went by. And somehow it got to the local TV. They sent a camera crew out. About the same time that it got to the TV station, it got to my father.
Mhm.
And my father was closer. And he ran downstairs, got in the car, drove over to the pool, and in no uncertain terms told me to get in the car. And by the time I got in the car, I saw a WJTV van drive up. And they got out and they're looking for me. And I'm riding off into the sunset. And that was my first lesson. My dad sat me down and said, son, I respect your opinion. You do not understand the consequences of your actions. So let me explain it to you. Because there are going to be certain things I cannot allow you to do yet, because it might affect our livelihood. And then he said, if you had gotten on TV and said the wrong thing, and this was one of the first things I learned about the Sovereignty Commission. We all knew about the Sovereignty Commission, or at least the Black community knew about the Sovereignty Commission. We didn't know who the spies were, but we knew how it worked because they had exerted pressure over the years when they needed to. And he said, they would have traced you back to me. And I don't know how they would have reacted, but I suspect that the next time I tried to get a car loan, they would tell me that my loan was in danger unless I get you under control. Now, do you really want to keep the family from getting a new car? If you're old enough to dabble in politics, then you're old enough to understand the consequences.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.